Hello, welcome, thank you. I'm Hadar Sutskin, the President and CEO of Americans for Peace Now. Thank you for being with us today for this webinar. I know for some of you, it's probably the second time you've joined us this week for webinar. It's a busy week. I'm sure many of you recognize my colleague, our Director of Government Relations, Madeline Cheragino. Hello, Madeline. Thank you for being with us. Before I introduce our guests in just a moment, housekeeping notes as usual. This webinar is being recorded. Again, for those of you who were with us on Monday, we had a technical glitch and that webinar was not recorded, unfortunately, but this one is. As you want to ask questions, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. Don't raise your hand. Use the Q&A. We will get to as many of the questions as we possibly can. And that's it. So I am now very happy to introduce our guest for today, Shachar Zahavi. Before we get to Shachar, just the framing a little bit, these last few weeks, really months, the subject of humanitarian aid has really dominated the conversations about the Gaza War, with headlines about aid trucks being stopped, being blocked. Obviously, reports and warnings about famine in Gaza, lack of medicine, lack of housing, so many different pieces. And we've looked at and we've seen reports about the different organizations, of course, UNRWA and their challenges and the reduction, the elimination of US funding there. Tragically, the killing of the World Central Kitchen workers. So the issue of aid and aid relief has been front and center. Today, we invited a guest to really come discuss the situation on the ground, the logistics of providing aid, how this actually works from someone who's really doing it. And for that, we will speak with Shachar Zahavi, who is the founder of SmartAid, which is an international aid agency, leverages technologies to enhance their humanitarian efforts worldwide. So welcome, Shachar. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Good. So, before we jump in and start talking about Gaza and all the details of the work that you're doing on the ground there, maybe take just a minute or two and tell us a little bit more about SmartAid and the work that the organization does. I'm sure some folks are familiar with it, but I'm willing to guess that perhaps not everyone is.
Okay. So a little bit just a background about me. Last week was 30 years since I started my international catastrophe humanitarian journey. It started during the genocide in Rwanda. So basically, I helped found an organization called LATED, and then I established a charity called IsraAID, which I ran for 18 years. And currently I'm running a charity called SmartAid. And the idea behind SmartAid was basically from the whole Startup Nation concept, where with all the decades of experience in war-torn areas around the world and natural disasters, we basically, me and a group of friends in America, Australia, and Israel, decided that what better way than to actually bring technology and to help people on the ground. Just a few very short examples. We got subcontracted by SpaceX, put up Starlinks during the war in Ukraine on the border of Moldova. We worked with Microsoft in Ukraine providing education. And of course, we work in about 40 African countries and do clean water, clean energy, telecommunications, basically leveraging the Israeli innovation and entrepreneurship. And that's what we do. Yeah, on the short term, yeah.
Thank you so much. So I wanted to now, of course, jump into why we're here, Gaza. Could you, before we get into the work that you guys have been doing there, could you just give us an update on the ground as to what people are facing? Obviously, it's all over the news, but we'd love to hear, in your words, kind of the scenarios.
Okay. Before I enter Gaza, just to give you a broad scenario of SmartAid, we have never worked in Israel. and never worked in Gaza before. We did help in Lebanon, Syria, Turkey, all the Afghanistan, Pakistan, all these different places, but here it was a very sensitive, so we were like focusing globally with what happened when Hamas entered Israel and massacred Israelis. Basically, what happened is we started and are still continuing to provide assistance to evacuees. We're working with farmers on the border, helping them rebuild kibbutzim and stuff like that. And the situation with Gaza, in the first few months, of course, everyone, including us, were focused on what can we do to help civilians in Israel, both the Jewish, Christian, Muslim communities that were affected. And around January, when things started to drag on, we started looking at the situation in Gaza. Now, we're a pure humanitarian charity. So basically, what we do is we provide aid to civilians. We're a non-government, non-religious organization. And well, I just came back a month and a half ago from South Sudan, where you have 8 million people persecuted by the Sudanese government. And when I came back, we started trying to figure out, can we do something to help the women, children, and civilians, innocent civilians in Gaza itself. The way that we do it is basically the charities, the international charities that work around the world, we see them all the time in all these different catastrophes. So we knew the people in the World Central Kitchen. We knew some of the people there. It's like, so you see them in Ukraine, you saw them in Sudan, you saw them in other places. And the same thing with other international charities. So what we did is we reached out to our partners, different partners, some European, some Americans, and we're trying to figure out what they were doing on the ground and how can we, as an aid organization, try and assist. And again, we were deliberating. We're registered as an American charity, as an Australian charity, Israeli charity. We could have done it from anywhere, but because it's in our backyard, it was very complicated. So so in the first, like around December till mid-January, we were talking to, getting advice from army officials. There is a special unit that's called COGAT in the army. Basically, their responsibility is to make sure that all the aid enters Gaza. And so we were speaking with them. We were talking with international groups. We even in America and Europe spoke to some rabbis and heads of federations and different in the Jewish community, outside the Jewish community. And eventually we decided, listen, we have to help. And that was the first phase. And what happened is we basically reached out to a few donors who were interested in supporting our work in Israel, as well as other stuff that we've been doing globally. And we told them, listen, we want to try and provide assistance in Gaza. And the first question was, how can you make sure, it sounds like a good idea, but how can you make sure it doesn't reach Hamas and Hamas doesn't use what you're going to provide? So what we did is we went back to the drawing board, and of course, with 30 years of experience in these kinds of situations, and of course, coordinating it with COGAT and looking what's allowed in, what's not allowed in, we eventually decided, and with our partners, that the best thing is first, let's put up some refugee camps. So the focus was putting up tents. Tents basically is something that we believe after the due diligence that we did, that Hamas won't have anything to do with tents. And people did need and still do need shelters. So that's one of the most basic needs, especially during the winter and now during the summer. And that's when we started providing, purchasing tents and bringing them into the strip. Now, just to give you some sort of an idea of how a humanitarian aid worker or a charity looks at a conflict zone, what we usually do is we always, if possible, try and purchase the items locally, whatever is needed, because that helps reduce the cost of flying things in, and it's easier because it's stuff usually that the locals relate to. So whether it's food or whether it doesn't matter what it is, technologically wise, or whether it's tents or stuff like that, it's traditionally oriented to the local community. So what we did is through our partners, with our partners, but currently the main entry of aid into Gaza is through Egypt. So the purchasing of aid and all the aid that's coming in is basically coming in from Cairo to the border with Israel. And there are a few ways that it goes in. I'm going to explain in a few minutes. And we purchased it in Egypt, put it in the warehouse of some of our partners there. I can't at this point mention the names of the partners, just for one reason alone, is because we don't want to jeopardize the workers on the ground themselves. We don't want them to be targeted. It happens all over the world, not only in Gaza. It happens in Sudan, happens in Ukraine, other places. So we try and tend not to put them in the front and have them being risked. So we purchased the tents, we rented the trucks with our partners. We had Egyptian drivers drive it all the way, sitting for about 2-3 days on the border in Egypt, between Egypt and Israel. Waiting for it to be inspected by the IDF, the Israeli army, and of course all of this, everything that enters Gaza, you have to get pre-approved by COGAT, by the humanitarian arm. So you can't just decide, okay, people need A, B, C, D, like in every other disaster. You basically need to go through the list that is approved by the Israeli government, and from that, you purchase and do the distribution. So that's how we got to the tents, and that's so what happens is you get to the border, the army inspects the trucks, goes through the content, makes sure that nothing that is not on the list is not in these trucks. I can tell you that we didn't have any problem, and like I think over 95, if not even more, percent of international aid was actually allowed in. The next step was you have to enter Gaza. So you can enter either through Rafah, you can enter to get to the north. What we're doing now is, and this is the next step that I'm going to talk about, but the army opened 2 new corridors, one in the center, near Be'eri, the kibbutz Be'eri, and one in the north. And usually to get to those areas, what happens is after the inspection, it's still on Egyptian trucks. It's escorted by the army to the different entry points. You get into the entry points, and then they basically have Egyptian truck, a Palestinian truck. They download the merchandise, put it on the aid, they put it on the Palestinian trucks, and then it moves on inside and goes to wherever it needs to go. logistically. The way that we operate in Gaza is we have both local charities, Palestinian charities, as well as American and European partners, charity partners. All of them, again, all of these charities, including the Palestinian ones, are charities that, again, are COGAT approved.
Hey, Shachar,
Um,
pardon me for a
yeah,
second. Before you get into the workings on the ground, which I want to get into, I have two
sure.
questions sort of before that phase.
Yeah,
So first of all, I'm
sure.
just curious, you started the work with the tents. Do you have, this is my easy question is, do you have a sense, do you know how many tents you've supplied? What the scale?
3,500 currently.
And I've seen the picture,
And
how many people more or less per tent?
it's a 10 for 12.
10 for 12. So that's, we're talking
12
about,
people.
we're talking about housing for approximately 40,000 people off the top of my head so far.
As a beginning, yeah, as a beginner. We basically started mid-January.
Right. And then again, before we get into the on the ground, I'm curious about,
Mhm.
you just said that you guys have not had problems getting the aid in for the most part, which I don't know if that's a function of the fact that you're sending in one thing so far, that it's tense and it's perhaps relatively sort of simple, or if there are other reasons. But talk, we've obviously heard other things from other groups about the challenges of getting aid in. Talk to us a little bit about what are those main challenges faced in delivering the aid to Gaza in this moment?
Um, there are a few challenges. One challenge is, of course, the inspection, which takes a long time. The amount of aid, and again, I can't compare it. Well, I can't to Ukraine or to other places. The amount of aid that needs to flow into Gaza needs to be um, 10 times more. It's not it's there is a barrier in terms of inspections. It takes time for the army to inspect. It takes time to the procedures to get approvals of what you want to get in. Of course, you have the UN in the middle of all of this, where they also have issues and agendas that they want to promote and want to push forward. I know that everyone's talking about the 700 UN trucks that are stuck on the Palestinian side. And that's also another problem, which on that side, I can tell you that it's actually international aid humanitarian problem. And it happens around the world. It's not only in Gaza.
Explain what you mean by that.
Well, logistic wise, the logistics to get it to the people to there, how do you get it there? Do you have enough funding, or do you have the clearance, or do you have the right people who would be willing to go into specific sites to deliver it? Then of course you have the unfortunate situation where Hamas sometimes takes over these trucks. So there's a lot of it's a very complicated war, and a very complicated area. I was in eastern Ukraine, literally like 5 kilometers from between the Russians and the Ukrainians about 2.5 months ago, and it's almost the same thing. You have both sides. You're in the middle of a war zone, and you're trying not to get shot. So with the army, and with they give you the green zones and where you can enter, where you can drive, and what you can do, but you don't know what's going to happen from the other side. So and again, there is not enough qualified aid workers on the ground. And when I mean qualified aid workers, uh, it's not enough to recruit someone just because he's there. you need people with experience on actually how to make sure that the supply chain is working, how to supervise it, how to make sure that the right people get it, that it's not duplicated, it's protected, it's everything. It's a profession, and there's not enough professionals there. So it's a lot of it is based on locals that are recruited into the international aid system on the ground. So that's another problem which is hampering the distributions.
I want to go back to something you said about, ensuring that supplies don't reach Hamas and that kind of vetting. We hear this a lot. And I would love, I think, to just get a little more detail from you if you're able to share. I know some things might be confidential, but if you could give just a little more detail as to like that kind of vetting and oversight that needs to be done, that is being done.
So, yeah, there are limitations on what I can say and can't. There's no perfect solution to give. You basically, and again, back to having people with background and knowledge on and protection. The vetting, basically the items that go in, the main concern, and that's the way that actually international organizations are making sure that it gets to the people, is they have their own people coming and doing the distributions, and not doing it through a third party. A lot of them do that. A lot of them partner with trustworthy local Palestinian charities that are, again, vetted by and approved by the Israeli army, by Kogat. And with them, there is some sort of a monitoring where you're going to distribute it, how many people are there. There are site visits before, site visits after. But again, it's never, there's no 100% guarantee.
So let's take it back to where you were going about what happens once the aid has gotten into Gaza. What are the logistical challenges delivering it around the Strip? Differences between doing so in the south, the Egypt border, versus your ability to get to the north. Have you been able to distribute the tents throughout the Strip?
So the camps is basically in the south, in the Rafah area. That is mostly the easiest area to enter. And now the getting aid to the north and to the center is the more problematic situation, which, as you saw with World Central Kitchen, there's a lot of risks. And that's why now they opened a few more entry points in the north and in the center of Israel, so you don't have to go from Rafah, go through unsecured roads. And so what we do is we're doing two things. Sorry, I'm just looking at it trying to in my head. The Rafah part is basically covered. It's easy. It's provided. You have over 1.5 million people there that need aid. The flow of aid there, again, there needs to be more flow of aid, but it's reasonable in terms of providing it, distributing it, putting up tents, distributing food, distributing water, stuff like that. When it comes to the central and the north of Gaza, the way that now the discussions are taking place is basically bypassing it again with Israeli security through Israel, in Israel, and then entering from above and entering it inside. And we have our partners on the ground some of them foreigners, and what they do is we have with them, they have, sorry about that. They have warehouses that are set in place there, that the items are put in the warehouses, which are guarded and basically are in non-conflict zones that are approved by COGAT. And from that warehouse, distributions are being done on a daily basis. And the next few days, actually, we've now purchased food, specifically wheat, and water, some basic items, and the plan is to do that route and enter from the north. That's hopefully until like the end of this week, early next week. Trucks would come from Egypt and go through the process. Yeah.
So I think I'm going to take a question from the chat here about, getting resources into Gaza, and whether you think perhaps that because you're an Israeli organization, does it make it easier in your estimation?
Nope, doesn't. No, it doesn't. There are security regulations and in wartime, and it's not only in Israel. and in Israel, you have people coming to support Israel and going to the kibbutzim and taking photos with soldiers. I just took a rabbi to Ukraine. He tried to take a photo of a soldier, a Ukrainian soldier, almost got arrested and got in jail. So it's not only Israel. Again, it's not, being Israeli doesn't simplify it. But it does. What we do is actually the engagement. It helps. We try and again, this is what we do in other countries. So what we do is for the international groups that we work with, we participate in the discussions with the Israelis and try and help them frame it in a way that, in a local context, that people would understand, that the equivalent and the army would understand what they need, and we explain it also to our international partners. Like, we try and be some sort of an in between to try and make sure that things don't fall in between the chairs. So, and hopefully, I don't know, we're continuing now that. I have to say, it took us a while. I had a talk with Hadar, a month ago.
Yeah.
It took us a while. We've been working not under the radar, because whoever is involved in humanitarian aid in Gaza, including the army, knew what we were doing. And of course, there was encouragement to continue doing so. But we got to a point where, and again with our friends from World Central Kitchen, that we started to try and, we're humanitarian workers. We're not Amnesty, we're not civil rights organizations. We're basically pure humanitarian. We want to get to whoever needs it. But it was really, really difficult, because again, they massacred our people from our community. I know more than a few of my friends were massacred. I have people that I know that are still abducted and are still in Gaza, and the situation in Israel is really not easy, as well as globally on the Gaza-Israel situation. And so what we've been doing is we've been talking to different individuals that we know from rabbis to heads of federations to foundations to people that we trust to try and figure out how can we actually get into a place where we say, guys, it's time for us as Jews to step up. And it's not something that is not said. The Israeli government, Jewish groups, even Israelis here say, we're against Hamas, we're not against the civilians. But only around a month ago, when I started speaking to Hadal, with the unfortunate incident with World Central Kitchen, we felt that people have started to it really started to sink in. Because living here in Israel, you look at what we went through, and this is the binoculars that we're always looking at. And suddenly, with what happened with World Central Kitchen, suddenly for a whole week there was nonstop Israeli coverage on the situation of what's happening to people in Gaza, and it was like people started to think, okay,
I
we
think that was really
should,
new also because again, I was
yes.
there, last month. I think some of the folks on this webinar were there with me last month, and one of the things that, to be honest, was a little bit shocking was how many Israelis we spoke to who are, educated, paying attention people, politically on the left, who really were basically not aware of the nature of the catastrophe in Gaza, the famine. Like they really just had not looked at and absorbed the depth of how intense that was. And so,
I
yeah,
I understand. I
yeah,
have to say, tomorrow we have a post-trauma compound here in the village where we provide trauma counseling to people from the kibbutzim, to the youth, to like first responders and all that. I totally understand. Like basically every second, third person knew someone either was abducted or that was impacted. So everyone was impacted, so everyone was internally like looking only inside. But it's been 6 months. Um, Unfortunately, I don't know what's gonna happen. No, I don't think anyone knows what's gonna happen in the next few months. And now I think people more are starting to understand that, okay, bring back the hostages is the main campaign. But now there is an added issue to the bring back the hostages. Bring back the hostages, stop the war. Like we just we need to start healing our own wounds. And again, it doesn't. Everyone's saying we need to eradicate Hamas, but uh, no one has a real answer on how to do that. Um, and I have to say, yesterday we decided we had an article published,
I
and
shared the
I have to.
article. I shared the article in the chat here. So if anyone hasn't seen it yet, you can see it there.
Yeah, and I have to say, I've been interviewed many times in the past 30 years. I've been to a lot of very stressing situations. This was one of I couldn't sleep for like a few days because I wasn't, and I'm still not sure what would be the reactions in the next day, in the next coming days, because it was only published yesterday. And I don't know, because I see there's a lot of anti on both sides. But what astonished me, and I mentioned to you, Hadal, earlier today, was until now we were approached by hundreds in the past 24 hours, hundreds of people that some of them I knew, some of them very high, and some of them very influential, some of them just regular individuals and families from across the board, and I'm talking about the Jewish community now.
Mhm.
Um, and all of them were like, "Kol hakavod, how can we donate? We want to support this effort. Like, just let us know what we can do." And I have to say, I'm still waiting for the for the punch. Hopefully, I won't get it.
Has there been
but
any negative, or so far has it really just been the
we have not gotten one negative response. I think it might have been, and again, it's boiling in me as well, because I'm Israeli and I'm part of the Jewish community as a whole globally. But I think people in the Jewish community, and again, it's people that some of them I don't even know. We check their backgrounds and stuff like that. I think people want to feel that, you know what, it might be time as Jews, as Israelis, that whoever, you know what, if there's an Israeli charity now doing this, we might feel relieved to do it through an Israeli charity, because you know what, if an Israeli charity is doing this and they're coordinated and they get support, and the army is allowing the aid in, then you know what, maybe we should start thinking differently. And there's a lot of people who sat on the fence that actually came off the fence. And I'm flying in May. I'm going to be a whole month in the US, and some people that I've been trying to reach for a few years literally wrote to me and said, "Hey, please, we're inviting you to our house. Like, we want to talk about this." So hopefully it'll continue. This would open some sort of a stream of open a stream for Jews and Israelis to actually have some sort of a way to donate to Gaza, and basically tell their friends, "Guys, we understand we support what's going on in Israel, but here, take a look. We're also helping Palestinians, and you know what? It's we're proud of how we're doing it." I think I don't know. It's for me, this is really, really new, this whole situation. And again, it's because it's in my backyard.
Yeah.
Thank you. We talked a bit about the tents that you guys have been providing and how you're now looking into other humanitarian goods to bring in. So I want to take a minute and ask you to talk a bit about what people are facing in terms of food insecurity, because it seems, at least from where we are, pretty far away, to be the most pressing need.
So there is food insecurity, but not at the level of, there are different levels in the aid world. There are different levels of food insecurity. It's not, it's not a famine. It's not a famine. That I have to admit, it's not a famine, and I've seen famine in other places. People are hungry, and they definitely don't receive the full amount of what you need as nutrition-wise by UN standards, and that's why the food is the trucks themselves are mostly focused on providing food.
Now, when you say it's not a famine, do you mean the entirety of Gaza? Because I know the integrated food security phase classification system believes the north might be in famine, but they don't have the ability to be on the ground to identify that. But I understand Rafah might just be like at risk of famine. So this is new information for me. Is it the entirety of Gaza in your estimation that's not quite at
I
famine?
cannot give you an estimation on the whole of Gaza. On the north, I'll know more next week when our teams are when we're going to do the distributions there and have some staff there. And again, I don't from working with international aid organizations and UN and all that. And again, I'm very supportive of everyone's work. I prefer first checking before declaring. So the saying that they're on a brink of famine without actually assessing that, and again, I understand the complexity of actually being unable to reach Northern Gaza is one of the causes. But I'm very cautious. Usually, as an aid worker, as a CEO of a charity, we usually tend to first do fact checking and then send out a statement. And again, I can't answer that question because we'll know more next week about Northern Gaza. Yeah.
That makes total sense. Thank you.
So I'm going to smush two questions together, but I do think they're connected. So one of them, again, is you talked earlier about, of course, anything that goes in, whether that's through SmartAid or anybody else, is coordinated with COGAT, inspected by the IDF. And there have been a lot of charges, allegations that, that a lot of aid has been delayed, that some aid has been, turned away and prevented seemingly arbitrarily, articles saying that aid was turned away because they found, not weapons, but all kinds of various things in there that they decided should not go in. So again, I know that hasn't been your experience, but I don't know if you know through your colleagues, the other organizations, whether you think that's accurate, frankly. And then the second question that I think is related, because as we're talking about the challenges of getting the aid in, of course, there was the moment that made a lot of news, at least here, when the United States announced that it was going to build this pier to bring aid in, over the sea. What do you think about that as a strategy for delivering aid? Is it effective in the short term? Is it, as some people have said, more politics than real impact on the ground?
To start with the delaying and pushing things back, I can tell you, and again, this is giving you guys a little bit of insights on how humanitarian organizations work. Or the UN agencies, UNICEF, World Food Program, UNICEF, like all these different groups, always coordinate with local governments. And then you have all the rest of the charities, all the way from the Red Cross to Oxfam and all the rest of the guys that you hear about. Charities sometimes have a tendency in disasters to not respect local traditions and local procedures. And some of them either do it to do provocation. I'm not saying all the charities, but there are some, and some of them are saying, guys, we know better. This is what we want, and they might do it. Maybe my estimation is because the professionalism of the teams on the ground might not be as needed and expected. If I work in a war-torn area and I get a list, and this is the list that basically says this is what we're allowing in, this is what is needed. We stand by that list. If there are additional stuff that we believe that needs to enter, then we start negotiation with whoever controls that area. And again, Sudan, Ukraine, Myanmar, China, like you have to it's hard to work in these areas. You're affected mentally, emotionally. I can tell you that I was drained and closed the cell phone for 2 days after the whole incident with World Central Kitchen. And you're not always willing to accept. And and it's both sides. There's no one there. I don't see that there's like fault on. It's just it depends. It eventually, like any other company, charity, whatever, depends on who leads it and how they feel the same day and what their vision and focus is. That's specifically for items that weren't approved in. Like I would never, if I know that people are starving, I would never put in items that are not approved on a truck with food because then it won't reach the people. So just need to do the basic math of how to, and just need to understand how to do it. Now with a peer itself, we don't know yet. I can tell you there was the trial and they're still continuing to try and figure it out. Both the Israeli government and the officials that we're speaking to, as well as some different very massive aid organizations, and of course coordinating it all with Cyprus and Greece and all the areas where it's supposed to leave. They don't. No one. They tried once. It's still. It's going to take a few more weeks until they see if it can actually be another channel and route to enter Gaza. I think the easiest route was before the war was through the Ashdod port. That's where most of the aid came in from. It never came in from Egypt. Egypt is a new thing.
Which has recently been reopened for the purpose of aid, right? As part of following the conversation President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu had last week, they recently decided to allow Ashdod to serve that function again.
And that was the main, for decades, that was the main port that all the aid to Gaza came through. So hopefully with that being opened, things would get better. But again, as war continues, there are more casualties both on the Palestinian side and on the Israeli side now in the north with the Hezbollah. And I don't know. We don't go into politics. I don't express my opinion on what needs to be done by our government, the American government. All I know is that we're trying to expand the services that we're providing now in Gaza. And that's our focus now. Basically fundraising as much as we can so we can purchase and bring in as much food and as much aid as needed. That's our focus, just to expand as much as we can until things get clear and hopefully peaceful. And then there are other governments who would eventually take responsibility over the rehabilitation of
So I want to follow up with something that I actually saw just as we were starting this right before. Madeline and I were discussing, the Congress is going to vote probably this weekend on a supplemental aid package. There's a lot of that includes aid for Israel, aid for Ukraine, a little bit of Taiwan, and in fact, looks like the base text does include humanitarian aid for Gaza also. Madeline, correct me if I'm messing this up, but I believe it's $9 billion for Gaza, correct? Right, which, again, I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole of the weird congressional politics right now of, which members of which party support which of those and who's going to vote for the whole package. But if that goes through, if we see a $9 billion hopefully, surge in aid for Gaza, I guess as somebody who's an expert on this kind of humanitarian relief, I guess what I'm asking about is the scale. Is that, $9 billion is a lot of money by any count, but is that enough? Does that help bring the people of Gaza, again, not enough to obviously rebuild all of Gaza, but does that help deal with the immediate crisis? What does that do?
It would help deal with immediate crisis, but it depends on who would eventually be the implementing agency on the ground. Because when the way that it works in the aid world is you have USAID, for example, they don't implement. So they basically subcontract it to the Red Cross, the CARE, to Save the Children, to whoever. And these guys need to purchase it, need to bring it in, need to get the clearance. So it's not going to be a $9 billion, okay, and we're going to push it all in a month. I think it's going to take a long time. But the more entry points, the better. It's basically the more that they open up, the more aid that's coming in. And again, I think the again, back to the thing that are one of the major things that are jeopardizing, like it's hard to do the work there, is you are limited in the capacity of aid workers with experience that who and you are limited in where you can actually go. It's a war zone, so there are specific areas you enter, and all the rest you can't go. So there's so many changes, like every day, that it's really hard to know what's going to happen tomorrow. And you can plan on sending 20 trucks tomorrow, and then suddenly something happens and it'll freeze for a few days on the border. So, but it's a good movement forward. The $9 billion of aid. I think that, and again, I'm listening to Israeli news, but we always hear the Israeli government, all the different officials. We hear the army officials, all the security officials saying aid has to flow into Gaza, else it's going to be a catastrophe, and Israel would eventually have to take control and take care of the Palestinians in Gaza. So there are discussions, there are stuff happening, and we just try just to work. We do whatever we can to just work. And I really hope for a tide in the Jewish community now. I really hope for a tide, because we do not take government money. We do not accept government money, not only for here, anywhere we work, because sometimes it comes with strings. So basically, we depend on corporations, on private donations, and so it's easier to when you don't have those political strings, it's easier to do what you think is best.
That leads me to our last question, actually. How can individuals and communities around the world support humanitarian efforts? Obviously, monetary donations, but anything outside of that as well?
What do you mean?
Like, is there anything else they can do besides, give money, or is it really just a financial?
Currently with Gaza, unfortunately, it's only money. I can tell you from the Israeli experience. The Israeli experience was people came and volunteered, people donated money, and people donated goods. The two from the three are impossible in Gaza to do at this point. You cannot enter Gaza, and donating goods, you need to understand that there is also a culture. So you need to purchase local items. I would never purchase something that is not traditionally acceptable to the local community. Just a crazy example. In Africa, in one of the wars, we saw Western charity bring in donated goods from the US, which is you and I would eat it, but these guys, the community doesn't know what it is, then is not touching it. So purchasing goods, like donating goods, unfortunately won't be helpful because I'm not so sure that the Palestinians would eat it. They have their own food that they want, and we just need to respect that.
Well, Shachar, first of all, I want to thank you for joining us, but much more than that, I want to thank you for doing this work. But in addition to doing this work, really for speaking publicly about this work, because again, the first conversations we had were, when you were doing this, but you were doing this quietly, and I think we all understand why you were nervous about what might the response be in Israel, what might it be in the global Jewish community, and frankly, what might it be among your companies that are donors and supporters of your work. And so I think the work is clearly incredibly important, but the bravery of being willing to come out and talk about it, I think is really important too. And I'm going to add on a note to what Madeline's last question was about what can you do, because I think there are things for us to do that are different than your work. And those are things like supporting not just legislation that is going to send money for aid, but supporting our government in its efforts to push and to make sure that things like opening the Ashdod port and the Erez crossing and other things happen to help facilitate that. So there is a lot to be done, and the work that you guys are doing on the ground is just so important. So again, thank you for joining us today. And we look forward to being in touch and supporting what you're doing.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right. And thanks everyone for joining us. Goodbye.